It's hard to know where to even begin when talking about a game like Metal Gear Solid. It's left an undeniable impact on the entire medium of video games. It's commonly attributed as the first stealth action game ever created. And even though feeling like a movie is a negative in today's standards, managing to have such a high level of cinematic prowess in 1998 was a serious technical and artistic accomplishment. Was all this praise towards the game warranted, and perhaps more importantly, is the game still worth playing today? The short answer to both of those questions is yes, and the long answer, you'll have to stay tuned. Now, I do want to preface this review with a disclaimer. I have never played Metal Gear Solid. With the exception of a few hours in Metal Gear Solid 5, I have no exposure to the series prior to playing this game here for the video. My review here is of Metal Gear Solid 1, and based on Metal Gear Solid 1 alone, without any context that later games may bring to the table. If you're looking for an analysis of Metal Gear Solid and how its themes and characters evolve over the series, you're in the wrong place. What I can provide you is an outsider's perspective, someone playing Metal Gear Solid for the first time in 2018 with no nostalgia for the series whatsoever. I'll be talking about the gameplay and story in relatively high detail, so come back after you've played it yourself if you don't want spoilers. With that out of the way, now we can really begin. You play as Solid Snake, a mercenary hired by the United States to handle a terrorist hostage situation at a nuclear weapons disposal facility. Things get complicated as you unravel conspiracies and find out that not only is this just a disposal facility, but also the lab at which a new superweapon is being built. Metal Gear, a bipedal robot with the capability of launching undetectable nuclear strikes from anywhere in the world. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. This game's narrative is a complex web of betrayals and top-secret organizations and military conspiracies. Don't worry, Snake has questions too, and you'll both be getting answers.
You're Meryl? Where could the other two be? Why did you disguise yourself as Master? A lady sniper, huh?
You and Snake travel through this facility, taking down the different members of this terrorist organization, Foxhound, over the course of the night until you finally manage to take down the big bad guy, who's actually your twin brother, and stop Metal Gear. I would like to emphasize my word choice of you and Snake, because this leads me to one of the coolest things that this game does, and why I think it has such a lasting legacy. Metal Gear Solid redefines the relationship between the player and the main character. And I'm not just referring to simple wall breaks. Other games from around that time were breaking the fourth wall, but it's different here. The line between where Snake actions stop and the player's begins is constantly shifting back and forth. Snake's sociopathic tendencies and lust for killing are traits that he gets grilled for by the other characters over the course of the game, and it's easy to attribute some of these traits to you, the player. This gets emphasized further by the fact that Snake is just a mercenary following orders. There are times throughout the story where Snake will question who's really in charge of his orders and the operations at large. Snake isn't in control of his own actions, in more ways than one, seeing as how he's just a pawn in a much larger game, and that also you, the player, are directly controlling him with your controller. Since the beginning of games as a whole, the controller has always been the vehicle through which you input commands to the characters. It's a bridge connecting you and Solid Snake, and that bridge becomes incredibly important in one of the game's excellent boss fights, Psycho Mantis. Psycho Mantis is a psychic member of the Foxhound terrorist group, and has the ability to read the minds of other characters and control them. Not only can he read the minds of other characters, he can read your mind, the player's mind, as well. At one point during your fight with him, he demonstrates his power over the controller and you, as the player, by asking you to place your controller on the ground while he displays his technique. While the controller is on the ground, it will start vibrating until Psycho Mantis makes it stop. It's a brilliant use of the fourth wall that shows Psycho Mantis has control over, well, the object you're using to control Snake, which rips some power away from you.
By the power of my will alone. What do you think now?
He even reads your mind by analyzing save data within your memory card, and spitting back at you what games you have stored on that memory card. As per the actual fight mechanics, you will need to dodge all these projectiles that he throws at you while simultaneously trying to attack him. The problem is, seeing as how he could read your mind and your inputs on the controller, he will preemptively dodge out of the way of most attacks. The only way to stop Psycho Mantis' ability to read your inputs is by severing the connection between the player and Snake entirely, by unplugging your controller and plugging it into the second slot. What an awesome twist. If you play through that boss fight without smiling to yourself at least once, you don't like video games. I'm sorry. There's another amazing sequence where parallels are drawn between Snake and the player, and that's in the torture sequence where Ocelot tries to pry information out of you. Normally when you view torture sequences, you're a spectator, but what if the villain torturing our main character hurt you as well? The way that you can have Snake resist torture is by repeatedly mashing the circle button until you can't take it anymore. By the time Snake was at his limit, my arm was at his limit too. It's even funnier given that this sequence has some implications for the narrative later on, depending on how long you could hold out. The relationship between Snake and the player continues to evolve as Snake gains more and more humanity throughout the game. Through the game's first half, he's a cold killer who's only interested in getting the job done. Further conversations between his love interest and his allies over the radio reveal more and more the man behind the facade, all culminating in a moment during one of the game's final boss battles. Snake has the perfect shot to take out the main villain, but an old friend would be caught in the collateral damage. If you attempt to pull the trigger, Snake will refuse to take action, despite how much you may try to force him to. It's an awesome ending to a really fun meta-narrative arc that you and Snake go through together. And I haven't really even started talking about the game a whole lot yet.
But now you're finished!
No! Fire the stinger!
But can you really shoot? You'll kill him too!
Now, in front of you, I can finally die.
It's not good. I can't do it.
While you're not watching cutscenes, you're playing a stealth game. You start the game with limited items and 0 weapons, and have to crawl under boxes, sneak past guards, and stay out of security cameras. You'll want to make heavy use of the minimap on the top right hand corner of your screen, which reveals the vision radius of the guards as well as the cameras. By the end of the game, you're going to have lots of different tools that you can handle these guards with. Guns, missiles, explosives, cardboard boxes. All of these items give you multiple ways of handling these scenarios. But that's just it. You have those different tools by the end of the game. This leads me into probably one of my only real complaints about Metal Gear Solid, the difficulty curve. It isn't exactly unusual to start out small in a game with limited equipment, then gaining more and more as you progress. You may start out an RPG with just a sword and a shield cutting down rats, but at the end, you'll be a dragon slayer with magic spells and familiar pets and shining armor. The key there is the starting off killing rats part, because that's not at all how it goes down in Metal Gear. You start the game off with no weapons, a small sliver of life, limited items, and are thrust into scenarios with the game's hardest enemies from the beginning of the game. There's no easing into the difficulty here, and not only are you forced to go up against the same guards you'll be dealing with in the late game, but the level design is even harder in the beginning than it is later on. The first 3 major rooms in this game are by far the most open-ended and difficult of the bunch. It's such a lopsided and confusing difficulty curve that it's absolutely alienating to new players. I implore you, if you've ever started playing Metal Gear but put it down after frustration with the first hour or so, pick it back up, please. You will not regret it. So outside of the backwards difficulty curve, the gameplay of this game is thoroughly okay. It's simple, doesn't do a whole lot wrong, but also isn't amazingly fun in any respects. The best word I can think for it is streamlined. No inventory limits of any kind, very generous auto-aiming capabilities, and a really simple stealth system where all you really need to do is stay out of the cones that you see on the map. It makes the game a pretty light experience. It's not hard to imagine that most are going to want to play through the game just to make it to the enjoyable story underneath. But what helps pull in the entire experience is the rock-solid style that knits these cutscenes and gameplay sections together. Though not many games from the PS1 era have aged super gracefully, this game's style has. The deliberately simple faces convey just enough to give the characters distinct looks, but also leave just enough for the imagination to fill in the gaps where the PS1 couldn't. The conversations with your partners, though at their core are simple talking head exchanges via radio, are brought to life with beautiful artwork and surprisingly great voice acting. And above all, the game's style is cemented with some real cinematography. You'd have a hard time finding games from around or before this time where cinematography is a major selling point, but Metal Gear has it in spades. Cutscenes feel alive and action-packed, but also scary and erratic depending on the tone of the scene. Even beyond the cutscenes, the fixed camera angles of your regular gameplay that will shift in and out of different rooms as you traverse, or even pivot behind you when you press up against a wall. It's incredible stuff, and it all feels so intentional and authored. And that brings me to another major boon of Metal Gear Solid, the rockstar pacing. All killer, no filler. This game is lean as hell. It's a brisk 8 or 9 hours front to back, and it makes amazing use of its small but purposeful world. The game always has a reason for you to keep moving forward, and outside of a few meta puzzles, you'll likely not find yourself getting stuck. There are only 2 sections of mandatory backtracking in the whole game, and at least one of them is very well contextualized. When your love interest gets shot down by an enemy sniper, you're forced to leave her there and travel back to the armory to get a rifle, causing a great deal of guilt for Snake. The other instance of backtracking is a late-game puzzle that involves you returning to rooms of differing temperatures multiple times, and alright, this one does get a little excessive with the amount of climbing up and down ladders you have to do. Look, I could write an entire novel of more thoughts I had while playing this game, but the review has to end somewhere. A fun meta-narrative that questions your relationship with the main character, streamlined combat and stealth systems, a killer sense of presentation, and airtight pacing. That's what Metal Gear Solid is, and I'm glad to have finally given the series the chance it so definitely deserves.